Skyrim has over 100 distinct enemy types, and every single one of them has lore, mechanics, and weird little secrets that most players never notice. From the bandit who somehow thinks he can take on a guy who eats dragon souls for breakfast, to ancient horrors that predate human civilization by thousands of years. Today, I'm breaking down every enemy in Elder Scrolls V and everything that makes them tick, starting with the ones you've killed more than anything else: bandits. Bandits are Skyrim's background radiation. They're the first thing you fight, the last thing you fight, and roughly 40% of everything you fight in between. There are over 40 named bandit locations spread across all 9 holds, from Embershard Mine right outside Riverwood to massive fortified operations like Broken Ore Grotto, where you literally cannot walk 5 minutes in any direction without some guy in fur armor deciding today's a good day to die. And there are distinct subtypes: common bandits, bandit thugs, bandit outlaws, bandit highwaymen, bandit marauders, and bandit chiefs. That's a whole corporate structure. They have middle management. But here's where it gets interesting. Bandit gear scales directly with your level. At level 1, they're swinging iron daggers. By level 25, these same roadside thugs are decked out in glass and ebony weapons. Which means somewhere in Skyrim, there's a bandit wearing armor worth more than most houses, and his plan is still, let's rob that guy, the guy who kills dragons, with his voice. Bold strategy. Here's the thing though, if you actually listen to their idle dialogue, a lot of these bandits reference the Civil War. They talk about being displaced, about having no other options. Many of them are war refugees and former soldiers who got chewed up by the conflict between the Stormcloaks and the Empire and spat out with nothing, which is, not ideal, but at least it's sympathetic. Still doesn't explain why the guy in glass armor thinks he can take me, but I appreciate the backstory. But if bandits are Skyrim's most common nuisance, the next enemy is its most common nightmare, the kind that's been waiting in the dark for thousands of years: the Draugr. Everyone treats Draugr like Skyrim's version of a generic zombie. You walk into a barrow, you see a corpse on a slab, it stands up, you kill it, you move on. Rinse and repeat for 200 hours. But Draugr are not zombies, they're not even close. And the fact that the game lets you sleepwalk through them in the early hours is honestly doing them a disservice, because these things have a story that goes back thousands of years. Draugr are ancient Nordic warriors, entombed alongside their dragon priest masters, deliberately preserved in dozens of named burial sites scattered across Skyrim. That's not a handful of random crypts. That's a province-wide network of tombs, each one stocked with weapons, armor, and treasures that were buried alongside these warriors on purpose. Nobody accidentally fills a crypt with enchanted greatswords. These people were meant to guard something, and they're not shuffling around swinging blindly. There are multiple distinct variants, ranging from your basic Draugr all the way up to Death Overlords. The low-level ones? Sure, they're target practice, but the high-level variants can use dragon shouts, unrelenting force, frost breath, disarm. A dead Nordic warrior from thousands of years ago can literally shout you off a cliff. That's not a zombie. That's a soldier who's been on duty longer than most civilizations have existed. Here's where it gets interesting. Many of those burial sites contain word walls, ancient stone monuments inscribed with the dragon language, the same language that powers your shouts as the Dragonborn. That's not a coincidence. The Draugr are directly tied to the dragon cult, a religious hierarchy that worshipped dragons during the Merethic era. Warriors who served the dragon priests were kept animated through ancient Nordic magic, feeding their life force to their masters even in death. They weren't buried to rest. They were buried to serve forever. So the next time one stands up and you one-shot it with a mace, just know you're killing something that's been maintaining its eternal vigil for longer than recorded history, which is, not ideal for it. But if you think ancient undead warrior cults are unsettling, wait until you meet the people in the Reach who are very much alive and somehow even angrier: the Forsworn. Most enemies in Skyrim attack you because they're monsters, or undead, or just generally unpleasant. The Forsworn attack you because you're standing on their land. And honestly, they have a point. The Forsworn are the native Reachmen of the Reach, the craggy mountainous region surrounding Markarth. They number in the hundreds, spread across over 15 named locations like Broken Tower Redoubt, Deepwood Redoubt, and Lost Valley Redoubt. They wear animal hides, wield crude weapons made from bone and scrap, and they will absolutely ruin your day if you wander into their territory unprepared. On the surface, they look like savage tribal raiders. But here's where it gets complicated. About 25 years before the events of Skyrim, the Forsworn actually took back Markarth. They reclaimed their ancestral city and governed it, briefly, as an independent state. Then Ulfric Stormcloak and his militia showed up, retook the city by force, and crushed the uprising. The survivors were either imprisoned or driven into the hills, where they've been waging a guerrilla war ever since. So when a Forsworn Briarheart charges at you screaming, he's not doing it, because he's a mindless, hostile NPC PC. He's doing it because your character represents the powers that stole his home. This is where the game quietly fails them. The Markarth questline, specifically the Cidhna Mine quest, is one of the most morally complex sequences Bethesda ever wrote. You meet Madanak, the king in rags, who lays out the Forsworn's case with genuine conviction, and then the game forces you to either help him escape or side with the Silverblood family, who are corrupt Nord supremacists. There is zero diplomatic option, no peace treaty, no let's talk about shared governance. You suppress them, or you help them kill people. That's it. The community is permanently split on this. Some players see the Forsworn as freedom fighters resisting colonization. Others point to the Hagraven worship and human sacrifices and call them terrorists. The truth is, probably both. A legitimate independence movement that got corrupted by Daedric influence and decades of brutality, which is, not exactly a cheerful conclusion. But if you think the Forsworn's story is tragic, wait until you hear what happened to an entire elven civilization living underneath Skyrim, Falmer and Chorus. The Falmer might be the most tragic enemy in any video game ever made, and I don't say that lightly, because on the surface, they look like generic cave monsters. Pale, blind, screeching things that rush you in Dwemer ruins. But here's the thing, these aren't monsters, they're victims. Thousands of years ago, the Snow Elves were a proud, thriving civilization during the Merethic era. They had culture, they had cities, they had everything. Then the Nords showed up, and after the Night of Tears, the Snow Elves, desperate for survival, turned to the Dwemer for help. The Dwemer said, sure, come live underground with us. We'll protect you. All you have to do is eat this fungus. The fungus blinded them, every single one, and that wasn't an accident. The Dwemer deliberately poisoned an entire race and then enslaved them in the dark for generations. Era after era passed. The Snow Elves forgot language, forgot sunlight, forgot what they even were. What crawled out the other side was the Falmer, which is, not ideal. They now inhabit over 20 dungeon complexes across Skyrim, with their largest population lurking in Blackreach, that massive underground cavern that makes you feel like you accidentally walked into another game entirely. They hunt using sound and their other heightened senses because they have zero functional vision left, and they're not alone down there. The Chorus, these enormous insectoid nightmares, live alongside them in a full symbiotic relationship. The Falmer tend them, use them, and harvest their chitin for armor. The Chorus go through multiple life cycle stages underground, from larvae to full adults to the winged Chorus hunters, meaning there's an entire biological food chain happening beneath Skyrim that most players never think about. But here's where it gets complicated. The Falmer build structures, they perform rituals, they organize raids. That's not animal behavior, that's civilization. Just a broken, twisted version of one. So every time you cut through a Falmer camp, you have to ask yourself whether you're killing monsters or murdering the descendants of genocide victims who never had a choice. And then there's Gelebor, one single uncorrupted snow elf, hiding in the Forgotten Vale, completely untouched by the degradation, the last of his kind, as far as he knows. He's standing there, polite and calm, while his entire race screeches in caves beneath the surface. The game never forces you to reckon with that, it just lets it sit there. The Dwemer did this. They engineered the complete destruction of a civilization through poison and darkness. And speaking of the Dwemer, their ruins aren't just full of Falmer. They left behind something else entirely. Dwarven automatons. Everything we just talked about with the Falmer is tragic, but the civilization responsible for that tragedy, they might be the most fascinating thing in the entire game. The Dwemer, also known as the Deep Elves, built mechanical armies so advanced that they're still running over 4,000 years after their creators vanished from existence. Nobody knows how, nobody knows why, and honestly, nobody's even close to figuring it out. There are several primary types of automatons scattered across dozens of ruin sites in Skyrim. Dwarven spiders are the ones you'll see first, skittering out of pipes and walls like metallic cockroaches with an attitude problem. Dwarven spheres are faster, rolling toward you in a ball before unfolding into a blade-wielding nightmare. Ballistas hit you from range. Centurions guard the deepest chambers. Then you've got the enhanced variants lurking in deeper ruins like Bathardums, which are basically the same machines but angrier and with better stats. And then there are Centurions. Dwarven Centurions are walking tanks that blast superheated steam, swing arms the size of tree trunks, and can send you ragdolling across the room. They're among the deadliest non-dragon enemies in the entire game, and encountering one for the first time in some forgotten underground chamber is genuinely terrifying. Some ruins stack multiple Centurions in sequence, which is the game's way of telling you that you took a wrong turn. Here's where it gets weird though. The Dwemer didn't go extinct, they didn't lose a war. Around 1E700 during the Battle of Red Mountain, every single Dwemer across the entire continent vanished simultaneously. Not died, vanished. The leading theory is that Kagrenac used his tools on the heart of Lorkhan, and the result somehow unmade the entire Dwemer race in an instant, which is, ambitious. But their machines kept going. Every spider, every sphere, every centurion still patrolling halls that nobody's walked in for millennia. The power source driving these things appears to be soul gems, but the engineering behind their longevity has never been fully explained. 4,000 years of continuous operation and zero maintenance. That's like finding a Roman toaster still making breakfast in an abandoned villa. And the real question nobody can answer is whether these automatons are truly autonomous or if something is still controlling them. Are they thinking? Are they following ancient programming? Or is some remnant of the Dwemer still out there, pulling strings from whatever plane of existence they disappeared to? The machines don't answer. They just keep swinging. But if ancient robots guarding empty halls feel eerie, wait until you step outside and meet something far less mysterious but equally capable of launching you into the stratosphere. Giants and mammoths. Every single person who has played Skyrim has been to space, not because of some quest or hidden location, because a giant hit them with a club and sent them into low orbit. You're level 3. You've just left Whiterun. You see a big guy standing near some mammoths, and you think, I bet I can take him. You cannot take him. What happens next is your character ragdolling approximately 400 feet straight up into the atmosphere, spinning like a sad helicopter, before landing somewhere in the next holdover. The Skyrim space program, as the community lovingly calls it, is probably the single most shared gaming moment of the 2000s. Everyone has a story, everyone has a clip, and nobody ever learns their lesson the first time. Here's the thing about giants, though. They're not actually aggressive. Walk near a giant camp and they'll just stare at you, maybe grunt a little. They only attack when you get too close to their mammoths or their territory, which, honestly, fair enough. Each camp typically has a couple of mammoths that the giants herd across the tundra like livestock, and the camps themselves are scattered across Whiterun Hold and beyond. These aren't random spawns. They're settlements. And that's where it stops being funny. If you pay attention to the environmental storytelling, giants have something resembling culture. They have social bonds. They paint on rocks. They tend their mammoths with genuine care. They're not brainless ogres swinging clubs for sport. They're intelligent creatures defending the only home they've ever known from a world that keeps encroaching on their territory. Their camps contain painted cow skulls, cheese-making equipment, and crude tools, suggesting a pastoral way of life that's been going on for generations. That's centuries of leave us alone that nobody listened to. And what do most players do? Kill them for their toes. Literally. The giant's toe is one of the most valuable alchemy ingredients in the game, which means there's a direct economic incentive to murder what are essentially peaceful, semi-intelligent beings minding their own business. You're not slaying a monster, you're mugging a farmer for his big toe, which is, not ideal. But if the giants made you question your morality, wait until you meet the creatures that threw theirs away on purpose. Hags and hagravens. Most enemies in Skyrim didn't ask for what happened to them. Draugr were entombed by a cult. Falmer were poisoned into blindness. Hagravens, they signed up. They looked at the option of becoming a twisted skeletal nightmare with talons and feathers sprouting from exposed bone, and they said, yes, please. And that's what makes them genuinely unsettling. Here's the deal. A hagraven is created when a mortal woman undergoes a dark ritual, willingly sacrificing her humanity in exchange for access to powerful magic. The process is irreversible. Once it's done, you're not human anymore. You gain advanced destruction and conjuration magic, the ability to hurl fireballs, and a twisted form that's somewhere between bird and corpse. The cost is that you look like someone tried to taxidermy a person and gave up halfway through. But here's where it gets complicated. Hagravens can still talk. They remember who they were. They reason, they strategize, and they lead. Across multiple locations in Skyrim, primarily scattered through the Reach, Hagravens serve as the spiritual backbone of the Forsworn. They're not pets or weapons. They're the ones calling the shots. The Forsworn treat them with reverence, because in their eyes, these women ascended, and the Hagravens agree. They describe the transformation as enlightenment, liberation. They didn't lose themselves. They became something better, which is, not ideal to hear from a creature that looks like it crawled out of a compost heap. Then, you've got the witches. The Glenmoral witches are the big ones here. They're a coven of hagravens living in Glenmoral Coven, a cave in Falkreath Hold. They're central to the companion's questline, specifically tied to the lycanthropy cure, and present you with a genuine moral question about how far you're willing to go. There's no clean answer. The whole thing also raises a question the community has chewed on for years. The transformation is exclusively female, Male mages pursue dark rituals and Daedric packs all the time in Elder Scrolls lore and come out looking perfectly fine, maybe a little pale. Women pursue magical transcendence and the game turns them into shrieking bird corpses. Whether that's intentional commentary or just unfortunate design, it's hard to ignore once you notice it. But if hagravens freak you out because they chose to become monsters, wait until you meet the enemies who had the choice forced on them and liked it anyway. Vampires and werewolves. Every enemy we've covered so far has one thing in common: you kill them. That's the relationship. They exist on one side of the sword, you exist on the other. But vampires and werewolves are the only enemies in Skyrim where the game looks you dead in the eye and says, "You want to be one? Go ahead." And that changes everything. Let's start with vampirism, because it's genuinely one of the more unsettling mechanics Bethesda ever designed. You get attacked by a vampire, you contract Sanguinare Vampirus, and you have exactly 3 days to cure it. Miss that window, and congratulations. You're now a creature of the night permanently. The disease progresses through 4 stages, each one stripping away more of your ability to function in normal society. Stage 1, people barely notice. Stage 4, NPCs become hostile and you're essentially unable to walk through a town without a fight. You're not playing a hero anymore. You're playing a monster wearing a hero's clothes. Then the Dawnguard DLC arrives and cranks the whole thing up to absurd levels. Vampire Lord form gives you levitation, necromancy, life drain, and a dedicated perk tree of powers that honestly rival some of the strongest builds in the game. Bethesda basically said, if you're going to be a vampire, we're going to make it worth your while. The Vampire Lord form added a genuine endgame power fantasy to what used to be mostly a debuff with some night vision, which is, not how most games handle the "you got cursed" scenario. Werewolves are the flip side. Join the companions, drink from the blood of a werewolf, and you gain the ability to transform into a hulking beast with 100% disease immunity and devastating melee stats. The trade-off is that Hircine, the Daedric Prince of the Hunt, now owns your soul. You can't get rested bonuses from sleeping either, so that's fun. Here's what makes this genuinely interesting though. Vampirism is a curse that feels like power. Lycanthropy is power that feels like a curse. Neither one is treated as a failure state. The game has dozens of vampire locations, named vampire characters scattered across Skyrim, and an entire faction war between the Dawnguard hunters and Harkon's vampire court that the community still argues about to this day. Which side is morally defensible? Nobody agrees. That's the point. But if you think vampires and werewolves are complicated, wait until we get into the entities that created them. The Daedra don't just curse people for fun. Actually, no, they absolutely do it for fun. That's the whole problem. The Daedra. Everything we've talked about so far has been mortal. Bandits, Draugr, vampires, even the Falmer. They all come from Tamriel. They all play by the same basic rules of existence. Daedra don't. They're from somewhere else entirely, and that distinction changes everything. Daedra are entities from Oblivion, the vast void that exists outside of Mundus, which is the mortal plane where Skyrim takes place. They serve various Daedric princes, each with their own competing agendas, their own realms, and their own ideas about what mortals are good for, and the answer to that last one is usually raw material. Here's the thing that makes Daedra genuinely unsettling. They're not evil, not in any way you'd recognize. They're amoral. Their values don't map onto ours because they literally come from a different dimension with different rules. A Dremora doesn't hate you. It just doesn't consider your existence particularly relevant, the same way you don't have strong feelings about an anthill you step over on the way to your car. Speaking of Dremora, they're the most interesting Daedra you'll encounter, and it's not close. Most Daedric enemies, your Atronachs, your Scamps, your Spider Daedra, they're essentially elemental or bestial attack dogs. Dangerous, sure, but predictable. Dremora can talk, they can negotiate, they have complex motivations, honor codes, and personal ambitions. Many of them aren't even acting freely. They've been summoned and bound into service by mortal mages, forced to fight battles they didn't choose, which, makes you wonder who the real monster is in that arrangement. There are roughly 8 primary Daedra types you'll encounter in Skyrim, and they scale aggressively with your level. Early game, a Flame Atronach is a genuine problem. Late game, Dremora lords show up wielding Daedric greatswords with the combat capability to rival dragon priests. They hit like a truck that's also on fire and also hates you on a philosophical level. The real cosmic horror isn't any individual Daedra though. It's what they represent. The Daedric princes treat Mundus like their personal playground. Mehrunes Dagon tried to invade Tamriel during the Oblivion Crisis, tearing open dimensional rifts across the continent. Not a war, not an invasion in the traditional sense. an existential threat to the fabric of everything. And the entities pouring through those rifts, they view your entire world the way you'd view a quarry, just resources to extract. There's even theological debate among lore scholars about whether Daedra have genuine free will or are simply fulfilling predetermined cosmic roles, and whether summoning one to help you fight a dragon constitutes practical problem-solving or slow spiritual corruption. The game never answers that definitively, which is somehow worse. But if interdimensional entities with alien morality scare you, wait until you meet the mortal servants who willingly chose to worship dragons and were rewarded with power that survived for over 4,000 years. Dragon priests. Here's something that should bother you more than it does. The hardest fights in a game literally called Elder Scrolls V. Skyrim aren't against dragons. They're against the guys who used to work for the dragons. Dragon priests were the mortal leaders of the dragon cult, a religious hierarchy that served Alduin and his kind during the Merethic era. We're talking thousands of years before the Dragonborn shows up. These were men and women, originally, who rose through the ranks of draconic worship until they became something else entirely. The highest-ranking priests wielded magical power that rivaled dragons themselves, which means at some point they stopped being human servants and started being something closer to leeches wearing fancy masks, which is, not ideal. There are 8 named dragon priests scattered across Skyrim's base game, with additional ones like Azadal and Zakrisos appearing in the Dragonborn DLC on Solstheim. Every single one is a unique boss encounter at a specific location. You will never stumble into a dragon priest randomly while picking flowers near Whiterun. You have to go find them. You have to walk into their tomb, disturb their ancient nap, and then deal with the consequences. And those consequences hit hard. Each priest casts high-level spells, often specializing in particular schools of magic: destruction, conjuration, restoration, you name it. They'll summon Atronachs while blasting you with fireballs while healing themselves. Most players build their character around one strategy. Dragon priests don't care about your strategy. They have several of their own running simultaneously. But here's the kicker. Every dragon priest drops a unique enchanted mask with distinct effects. One boosts your prices with merchants and your magicka regeneration. Another makes you immune to disease and poison. Each mask is essentially a build-defining item, which turns these encounters into genuine boss fights with genuine rewards. In a game that often lacks both of those things, dragon priests are the exception. They feel designed. They feel intentional. They feel like someone at Bethesda actually sat down and said, this one should matter. The part that really gets me is the timeline. Their dragon masters were defeated and driven into hiding for thousands of years. The dragon cult collapsed. The world moved on, and yet these priests remained powerful in their tombs, preserved by their own magic and the power granted to them, waiting in undeath, maintaining magical strength that persisted across eras. They didn't need their gods to stay dangerous. They just were. That's not loyalty. That's ambition that outlasts civilizations. So, yeah, players regularly report that dragon priests are harder than actual dragons. The irony of that should not be lost on anyone. But if you think servants of dragons being tougher than dragons is backwards, wait until we talk about the dragons themselves. Dragons and Alduin. Everything in this video has been building to this. Every Draugr, every dragon priest, every ancient ruin filled with word walls and coffins. All of it exists because of dragons. They're not just the biggest threat in Skyrim. They're the reason Skyrim's history looks the way it does. There are roughly a dozen unique named dragons in the game, plus dozens of generic encounters that scale with your level. But the named ones are where things get interesting. Dragons in Elder Scrolls lore are immortal, intelligent, and fundamentally divine. They're fragments of Akatosh, the god of time himself. Every dragon you fight is, on some level, a piece of a god that decided it wanted to eat you. And then there's Alduin. Alduin the World Eater is canonically the firstborn of Akatosh, and his literal reason for existing is to consume the world, not conquer it, end it. He's not a villain in the traditional sense, he's a cosmic function. The universe has a reset button, and it's a giant black dragon with red eyes. Here's where it gets complicated. Alduin wasn't killed during the original Dragon War. The ancient Nords used an Elder Scroll and a special shout called Dragonrend to defeat him, then hurled him forward through time. They didn't destroy him, they postponed him. Every dragon waking up across Skyrim isn't some mysterious resurgence. It's a delayed consequence of an ancient civilization kicking the can down the road, which is, relatable. The Dragonborn absorbs dragon souls after killing them, permanently preventing resurrection. Normal warriors can kill a dragon's body, but only a Dragonborn can consume the soul and stop another dragon from bringing it back. Alduin's final defeat happens in Sovngarde, the Nord, afterlife. Even then, his destruction is left ambiguous. The ancient heroes aren't certain whether he's truly gone or whether he'll return when the world actually needs ending. So you might not have saved the world. You might have just bought it time. Then there's Paarthurnax, Alduin's brother turned pacifist philosopher, living atop the throat of the world. He openly admits his nature compels him toward domination every single day. What is better, to be born good, or to overcome your evil nature through great effort? That line carries more narrative weight than the entire main questline, which brings us to the elephant in the room. Alduin, this cosmic inevitability, this world-ending firstborn of a god, is widely considered one of the most anticlimactic final boss fights in RPG history. The lore builds him into something terrifying, and then the actual fight is just a dragon with more health. I am the harbinger of the end times. Cool, I have a fork, but maybe that's the point. Alduin isn't meant to be a satisfying fight. He's meant to be a question. Can you truly kill inevitability or just delay it? And if the answer is delay, then every victory in Skyrim is temporary. Every dragon soul absorbed, every shout learned, all of it just buys time before the next cycle begins. But if you think the World Eater is the most dangerous thing a Dragonborn can face, wait until you meet the two enemies who were specifically designed to humble you, Miraak and the Ebony Warrior. Every Dragonborn thinks they're special, and technically, they are. But the player character isn't the first, not even close. That title belongs to Miraak, and his story is basically a thousands-year-long warning about what happens when power meets ego meets a Daedric prince with tentacles and a library card. Miraak was the original, the first mortal to ever absorb a dragon's soul, millennia before the events of Skyrim even began. He served as a dragon priest, rose through the ranks, and then did something genuinely impressive. He rebelled against the dragons themselves, refused to kneel, built his own following on Solstheim, amassed power, and for a brief window of history, looked like he might actually carve out his own destiny. Then Hermaeus Mora got involved. The Daedric prince of forbidden knowledge offered Miraak power in exchange for servitude. Miraak accepted because apparently nobody in Tamriel reads the fine print. When the other dragon priests came to destroy him, he was pulled into Apocrypha, Mora's realm of infinite books and infinite imprisonment, and stayed there for thousands of years, locked away, twisted, still powerful, but completely owned. His rebellion against one master ended with him becoming the property of another. Here's where it gets complicated. When you finally fight Miraak in the Dragonborn DLC, you don't actually get to finish him. Hermaeus Mora intervenes, kills Miraak himself, and essentially reminds you that every Dragonborn is just a piece on somebody else's board. Players rightfully criticize this as anticlimactic. You spend an entire DLC building toward this confrontation, and a giant tentacle steals the kill. Some argue it adds philosophical depth about power always having a master. Others argue it's just annoying. Both camps have a point, but Miraak isn't the final enemy Skyrim has to offer. That honor belongs to someone far stranger. The Ebony Warrior appears only when you hit level 80, near the maximum. He approaches you in a city, fully clad in ebony gear, and makes a single request. He wants you to kill him, not out of despair, not because he's corrupted. He's simply done everything there is to do, cleared every dungeon, fought every fight, and now the only worthy conclusion to his journey is death at the hands of the one person left who might be strong enough to deliver it. Think about that for a second. He's you. He's literally what happens to a player character after the credits roll and the quests dry up. He's walked the same path you're walking, reached the same ceiling, and arrived at the only question the game can't answer. What now? Miraak shows you what a Dragonborn becomes when they chase power forever. Enslaved, corrupted, hollowed out across millennia, killed not by a worthy rival, but by the thing that owned him all along. The Ebony Warrior shows you the alternative. A warrior so complete, so finished, that the only thing left worth doing is dying well. Two mirrors, two endings. One asks what happens when you can't stop. The other asks what happens when there's nothing left to start. And honestly, I don't know which one's worse. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every unique weapon in Elder Scrolls V, click the video on the screen now.